said, I do record all sessions. So if you miss, something, you want to go back, you can always look it up. I try to post it within a day or two, usually.
I also have a question. Sorry.
Sure, no problem.
On here in Populi, we can find that there's one assignment due soon, but well, I already sent you a message about it because I cannot find what do we have to do.
You cannot find what we have to do. All right, let me see what it is. Okay.
The one that says 07 exercise 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me see. Okay, 07 exercise 2. So that's very simple. You go to lessons, and you go to week 7, and it's there. Let me show you. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and do my.
Yeah, it's
Found it?
here. Yeah, I found it, but here, but not when it says assignments. I found it from lesson 7 week, but not. I cannot find them from assignments.
Don't look under the assignments section. I wish I could hide that period from students.
Okay.
It is not the best way to find things. There's the reason why I create lesson plans. So like when you click on lessons and you click on the week number, everything that you need to do for that week is in that week. It's kind of like a little holder for that particular week. And the next week is going to hold all the assignments for the next week and so on and so forth. So that's really all you need. Don't worry about that assignments tab. It's much more confusing because it's more for inside use rather than for you guys. So that's how you find it.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Excellent. Fantastic. I'm glad to hear that we worked that out. All right. So I'm going to, let's see, open up here in chapter 7. And we are in chapter 7, organizing and outlining your speech in your textbook. That's where we are. So we're going to talk about organization and outlines basically today, which could be, a little bit of a boring topic, perhaps. Maybe not as exciting as some of the other things we've discussed, but it's very important because the structure of your speech and how you put it together. This is the bones. Sometimes in class when I have my whiteboard, I draw a little skeleton of a fish. I put a little head and I put the little spine and some bones coming off of it in the tail. And I tell people, imagine that this is your speech outline. You have the spine, which is your central idea. Okay, that's your core main thought that you want to express, and from that spine go those little bones. Those little bones are your little subpoints, examples, illustrations, whatever you want to do. So essentially, that's kind of, that's your outline. It's like the bones, and then you put the meat on the bones, and that becomes your speech. So if that helps you a little bit, that's a way to think about it. Okay, so in chapter 7, as we crack open the book, there's always that opening section. And so the authors talk about organizing your speech and having a clear pattern to your presentation. And that helps everyone. So, of course, if you have listened to other people's speeches, you've heard people say first, second, third, or whatever, making their points and sometimes numbering them, or, some sort of organization becomes apparent. And when you speak like that, and if you have like 3 things to say, for example, and you make it as first, second, third, then it's very easy for people to track. It's very easy for them to follow. They know that you made point number 2 and what's coming next is number 3. And after you finished with number 3, they know your speech is over before you even concluded it. But the idea is this kind of helps people to anticipate and follow along. And so a very organized structure is good for you and really good for your listeners, because if they're able to track with you and participate, sort of say in your speech structure even, it helps them to remember, it helps them to appreciate what you have to say better. So from that perspective, having a well-organized speech, well laid out, is super, super helpful to everyone, and to you and to your audience. So, which is why, we're devoting the whole chapter to speech organization, really. Okay. So in the opening section, the authors talk about, let's see, they talk about developing your speech. You know, what is really involved in developing your speech, and they give us like 5 points. They say your listeners learn more from a well-organized speech. Well, I just said that. If your speech is well-organized, it's easier for people to learn. Okay, so the better structured your speech, the more people will quickly pick up the points you actually want them to remember. An organized speech is easier for you to present. Yeah, the more organized you are, the easier it is for you, because you're not searching for that point. You know you have 3 points, and 1, 2, 3. You go through them, and boom, your speech is done essentially, and you know where to go next because it's that simple. You do appear more credible, as they say, when you present an organized speech, and some people believe that a well-organized speech is more persuasive. So if you have a speech to persuade and it's very sort of say structured and people can follow your structure easily, they actually are more easier persuaded because they kind of see the logic and they see that you're organized and they see that you really thought this through and you just sound more convincing, even if, even if your point is rather simple. And then so basically your listeners really appreciate the good organization. It makes them feel good about the speech. So kind of you're giving them quality essentially. And so immediately they're happier with a speech that's well structured, well organized, especially if they can recognize that structure, because you may structure it, but they may not recognize it. So it's making that easily to recognize structure. That's really helpful. Now, the next section talks about developing your central idea. And we've already talked about your central idea. The central idea is what? It is basically one simple statement, preferably be one sentence. Could be even not an entirely complete sentence. It could be just a phrase. But, it could be a short sentence. And if you could do it in a short sentence, that's really the best. It's a fully developed, complete thought, your point. Your central idea is, what are you trying to say? Not what your speech is about. Okay, that's a very different idea. Your topic is your topic. Okay, but what are you trying to say about your topic? Your topic is school tuition. What are you trying to say is school tuition is way too expensive. See, that's a different thing. So even though you're talking about school tuition, your point is what you're trying to explain or say, or what is it that you're trying to move forward, or you want everybody to understand that you're not happy about the costs. Okay, that's your main point. That's your central idea. And then around that central idea, you build your outline. Whatever your central idea is, once you clarify it, once you say, all right, I can express this in one sentence. Here's my point. If everyone walks away out of this room and they grab onto this one simple sentence and they believe it, then I've achieved my goal. So, all right, here's my point. And now how do I develop my point? Then you take your speech and you build it on that central idea. So just like, as I said, imagine this fish skeleton and the central spine is going to be in the central idea. And then all the little bones attached to it, kind of run up and down are those little subpoints that really help you to see the full picture of what you're trying to say, but you have that one central idea. And so the wording is very important. The precision is very important. The clarity is very important in your central idea. The better you can articulate it, the clearer you can articulate it, the more your listeners will be able to understand it and walk away with just precise understanding of what it is that you wanted to say. There will be no misunderstanding between you. So, and the better you form it, the easier the outline will come, because the outline just flows naturally out of it. Okay. So there's some examples in the textbook that they give you of how this can be done, and I hope that you made made note of those examples. The next aspect of building your speech outline is choosing how you're going to organize it. And there's a whole number of ways of organizing. And so, in fact, most of this chapter is devoted to really going over some of these ways in which the speeches can be organized. And you can be as creative as you want to be, because, I don't know what your speech is going to be about, or, well, I do know what your speech is going to be about, but let's say you're being asked to give a speech on whatever topic you want to give, and you will have to be creative to make that arrangement. How are you going to arrange it? How are you going to organize it? There are some traditional ways in which speeches are typically organized, and one of those organization ways should suit you. But you can be as creative as you want to be, yet these ways are really helpful to learn, because if you understand them, you may say, what, this one really, really fits what I'm trying to do. This works really well. Or you may try it and say, no, that doesn't work. I really, really want to organize it more this way. So it's okay to do that. So to answer the question, which is the structure that works for me, which was structure works for my speech, in short, it's really up to you, and it's up to your speech. It's going to depend on your central idea and how you're going to take it, and which direction you're going to take it. So there's kind of two main orientations that I'm going to talk about. One that has to do with the content, and one that has to do with your audience. Okay. So you always want to think, what do my audience know about this topic that I'm talking about? How much do they know? And what do they really need to know to get my point? They don't need to know everything about what you're saying, but in order to understand what you're saying, or to fully appreciate what you're saying, they may need a little bit of learning or schooling on that particular topic. And you can assume that people know some general things, but they may not know the specifics, which you might have to explain to them, basically. Okay. And then, of course, you have to ask yourself a question: how can I move towards my goal? I have my goal. Here's my point. I want to get to that point, and I want to conclude my speech. How can I structure my speech so that it moves towards the conclusion? Because sometimes people structure the speech and they kind of like imagine they take off in the airplane, right? And they're flying and they can't land it. They don't have a good conclusion. It's like, where's the landing? That was a good takeoff, but there's no landing, and that's hard. So you have to think with the landing in mind before you kind of take off, basically. So that's the idea. So there are different types of patterns out there, and we're gonna look at two main categories: speech-centered pattern and audience-centered pattern. Okay, that's on page 100 that I'm talking about, those two patterns. Those are basically big organizational categories. Speech-centered pattern means a pattern that works out of the speech. It's just what you talk about, the topic that you discuss, and the point that you make are kind of, outflow naturally into a pattern of organizing your speech. Or audience-centered pattern. Audience-centered pattern doesn't have to do as much with your content, but has more to do with how your audience perceives that content, or what do they think, or what do they know. So you're kind of, in that pattern, you're being way more sensitive to the audience, and you're trying to fit what you have to say into how they think, assuming you know how they think, and assuming you can kind of surmise what it is that's going on in their mind as they're listening to this particular speech. So one is more focused on the people who are listening, and the other one is focused more on the content itself. Both are acceptable. Both are fine. Good ways to organize the speech. Some people are proponents of one, other people are proponents of another. In reality, it's really the content, the type of speech that you're doing, that really tells you which way you should go. Let's put it that way. All right. So what are the speech-centered patterns of organizing your presentation, your speech? Well, there are several patterns that the textbook offers us. All right. The first one is chronological pattern. Well, from the name itself, you should all understand the chronological has to do with what? What is chronology? Anyone?
Chronologically is like an order, right?
Yes. Chronos in Greek means time. So chronology is time. It's timeline. It's history, basically. It's how this happened first, this happened next, and then that happened, and then this happened. It's like you telling a story, but in a sequence, essentially. So chronological means sequential. Chronological means one event after another. So you can organize a speech in a chronological fashion. For example, if you're given a speech about yourself, let's say an autobiography of sorts, you could say, I was born in such and such a year in such and such a place, and then I went to kindergarten, and then I did this, and then I did that, and then I graduated college. And you can just go through your entire life in chronology. You can even cite specific years and places and things you did, and kind of almost like a resume style. All right. So that's a chronological speech. So like a resume is really a good presentation, so sort of say, of information in a very chronological fashion, highlighting some major events. Or you can talk about the history of yourself, or the history of a country, or something else that happens chronologically, essentially. And that's a good speech. You could talk about the history of a company, for example, or some enterprise, or something like that. Or you can talk about a history of the development of an idea, or a particular product. Many applications out there, depending on where you are, whether you're in a business world or somewhere else. There are many ways of using chronological patterns. And so some speeches, if you're trying to inform, especially, and you're kind of trying to establish a little bit of history for people, then chronological patterns are really good. It is certainly a way to organize a speech. Again, it depends on your topic. It depends on your purpose. It depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve and where you're trying to take that speech. Maybe that's the pattern that works for you, okay? Another pattern that is kind of related, different, but sort of related, is a spatial pattern, okay? Spatial pattern has to do with space. And I don't mean outer space, not like, planets and aliens and stars and stuff like that, but basically locations, spaces that we inhabit as humans. It can move from left to right, and up and down, or north or south, and east and west. And so you can talk about different locations. For example, sometimes when I talk about, my life, I like to talk about all the different places I lived and different places I worked and things I've done. And sometimes I organize it based on space, continents, sort of say, eras in my life, places where I've been, and things I've done, sort of say. But I can organize it through locations rather than dates, for example. So it's another way of considering of structuring something. You could certainly use locations as your point of reference, to move your audience forward in speech. Because remember, speech is supposed to be moving forward. It's supposed to be taking you somewhere. And so one place you begin, then you take the person to the next place, then you take the person to the next place. And that's a spatial pattern, by moving your audience from one area on one location to another. So maybe that particular organization structure will suit your speech. That's a possibility, and it's a good one. Another pattern that is a bit more complicated, let's put it that way. I would say the reason why I call it more complicated is because a lot of people get tangled up in that one. It's a tougher one to work with, because people logically do not always get to the right place when they use this particular pattern. It takes much more sophistication and knowledge to bring forward, and it's also the pattern that's easier for people to argue with, which is why using it, you might want to consider it twice. And that's called a causal pattern. Okay, causal pattern. I'm on page 102 right now. Okay. Causal pattern is when you organize your speech, and whatever it is that you're explaining or teaching or sharing with your audience, as the cause and effect. Cause and effect. What is cause and effect? Can anybody explain that to me? When I say cause and effect, what do I mean? Cause and effect.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I think that cause and effect are it depends is there
I lost Francisco.
every action that happens have like a reaction. So
Good. I heard the last
that's
part of what you
essentially
said. Every action has a every action has a reaction. Good. Cause and effect. Yeah. Something happened, and that something that happened caused something else to happen. Right? Is that what you're saying, Francisco? All right. He's got a bad connection there. That's okay. That happens. So cause and effect is when you assume that one event has resulted in something else happening, basically. And so the reason why I say cause and effect is a tough one is because sometimes it may seem to us that something is the cause of something, and it's really not the cause. We think it's the cause. It seems to us like the cause because what we have is an incomplete information. Okay. So the cause effect pattern is a really tough one. I heard people making lots of speeches using this particular pattern of organization. And my only caution is that sometimes people simply do not have enough information to make a judgment of saying something is the cause of something. They misidentify the root cause and therefore build an entire speech on this idea, but the idea is inaccurate and incorrect. And the only reason is they just don't know enough about this particular issue to be able to see the true cause or the true reason, why this happens or why that happens. So the cause and effect is, a problematic one. It's a logical organization of a speech, and sometimes people basically get lost in logic and simply, do not express it accurately. When that happens, they create a speech that is confusing or very easy to argue with. Because if you tell me that something is the cause of something, then and it's not 100% the cause or only one of the many causes, and I can think of other causes, then automatically I've already dismissed your idea in my mind as you're giving a speech because I already know other causes and you're not talking about those causes. You're making it all about that one issue. And I say, nah, you're wrong. So in my mind, you've already gone off and your speech does not really deserve my hearing because you just said something that's not true. And I already know it's not true because I happen to know more about this issue, or I happen to see it better or understand it deeper or whatever. And so that's where the cause and effect speech, you can get in trouble with it. You better really know what you're talking about, to be able to utilize this type of pattern of organization. So it's a good pattern. It's a good pattern, but you really better know what you're talking about. Otherwise, you can get in trouble. Okay, so just by the way, just because something happened a certain way in the past doesn't mean it's going to happen that same way in the future. So a lot of times people just oversimplify the whole cause effect logic and create fallacies, in their speech basically and their logic. So that's the problem with it. But it is a good pattern to organize. You just have to be very careful with that one. Okay. Another pattern that is very easy and very common, and you probably know this one more than any other pattern because this is the most common pattern probably out there, is the topical pattern. Okay, where you basically organize things together under a particular topic, a particular heading, and that's just it. It's a very simple organizational pattern that we're used to. Okay. And it's easy to organize a speech under a topical pattern. Okay, so there's some examples of topical patterns here for you on page 102 and 103. So hopefully they are helpful. This is definitely the most popular and the easiest to use. Okay, it's very difficult to go wrong with this particular pattern. Doesn't mean it's the best pattern for your speech. If you're writing a speech about something, it may not be the best one, but it certainly is an easy one. Okay, and so it's kind of hard to mess up. Okay, so those are, as you can understand, these are the speech or the content-oriented ways of organizing. When I say that, what I mean by this is that it's the very speech itself, is the content that kind of dictates, oh, it's better go chronological, or it's better go causal or spatial. It's the very contents of your speech, what you were talking about, is sort of lending itself to saying, it's really best to organize it this way. And you just follow the logic and say, okay, I'll organize it that way. Because if it's a biography, of course, chronological biography would be better, and because that's how most people think about time in a linear sense. And so, okay, then I'll organize it that way. So, so these are content focused. These are speech them itself focused ways of organizing your outline. Okay. And the second category that the textbook presents us is the audience-centered pattern organization. Well, as you have already guessed, and I've already explained this to you briefly, audience-centered means you focus on your listeners. It's not about your speech. It's about how they think, how they feel, what's going on through their minds when they hear these topics or these words. And so you basically put them first and say, I'm going to organize it to help them get it. Okay. And that's an audience-centered or audience-focused speech, which are quite effective, by the way. But again, not every speech fits into this pattern. It really depends on what you're trying to do. Although some people may argue that the audience-centered speeches are much more effective because they're more powerful, because they connect to the listener in a much more natural way, and and people are more engaged with them. So anyway, I think that largely depends on a speech, but it probably is generally true. Okay. So there's several varieties of this particular pattern of organization. The one that is probably the best, and probably should be used more often than any other, it's the familiarity acceptance order of things. Okay, very simple idea. Familiarity acceptance order is when you begin with something familiar, something that your audience already know, and then you move into something new and challenging and unfamiliar. So it's like you already know this, and then you state what it is that your audience knows. But you say, but you probably never thought about that, and then move your audience into something they probably don't know about this very topic. And that's where the big interest and aha moment comes in, and people say, yeah, I never thought about it this way, or no, I really didn't, consider this particular matter or issue, because I do know this, but I never looked deep enough to know that. And that's where you can take your audience. Again, you're trying to inform people about something, or convince them about something, and you can say, okay, this is what you already know. You all know this, you know this, you know that, you know this. Everybody knows this is true. Everybody knows this is true. And most of your people in the audience are going to say, yes, yes, we do. We know that. Why? Because you're only talking about general facts, that kind of common knowledge to everyone. And then you say, okay, well, what you probably don't know, and that's when you make your sort of say contribution to the speech. And that's where they say, oh, yeah. And so that makes that speech, very well structured and interesting, and it grabs your audience. So it is very well suited, as the authors say, for persuasive speech. Okay. Especially if your listeners are hostile if they're prone not to accept what you have to say right away, if they don't want to, if you just said it what you wanted them to hear, they will, you say to yourself, they're probably not going to reject this idea right away. So I say, okay, fine. Then I'm not going to say it just straightforward. I'm going to build on something they know, and then I'm going to lead them logically into the point I really want to make. But I'm going to start with what they already know. Let's get the foundations straight, sort of say. And then I will come in with my point, which rests on all these other ideas they already do know. And so that becomes a very logical, very structured, very sophisticated way to lead your audience towards a particular conclusion that you want them to have. All right. So that's, very effective pattern, very, good to use, especially in speeches where you have to argue something or convince somebody of something and persuade people. All right, that's one particular pattern that is focused on the audience. If you think about it, you know what you want to say, but you don't really say it straightforward like you want to say it, because you're trying to lead your audience by really following their process of thought. That's really what you're concerned about. Okay, so that's one. The next one is called inquiry order. Inquiry is when you ask a question, right? That's what to inquire means. To inquire means to ask a question. And so you basically lead people step by step to this information or knowledge that you have reached or acquired. But you don't just give it to them, because once again, if you give it to them, it's kind of, they may not get it. So lead them through the logic, of how you got there. How did you arrive to this conclusion? How did you arrive to this particular, reason or understanding? And so you ask questions, you ask a series of questions, and you take your audience step by step closer and closer and closer to that conclusion. And you just basically lead them. So that's called inquiry order, where you ask questions, consider things, and then slowly lead people towards that answer that you already know you want to give them. But you don't just want to give the answer, you actually want them to take that same journey that you perhaps took when you came to that answer. And so what it does, it enables audience to be judges for themselves, whether the information that you're offering or policy that you're proposing is good or bad, reasonable or unreasonable. So by leading them to the logical steps, you're helping them to see the issue the way you see the issue. And either they're going to agree with you or they're going to disagree with you. But at least you're presenting them with enough of the logic behind your conclusion so that they can decide whether that conclusion was reached, fairly or unfairly, properly or improperly, however you want to frame that. But that's the idea. So that's inquiry order. All right. Perhaps related to that one is another one called question order pattern. And so this is where you raise basically answers. You do a question answer. That's what it is. You ask a question and then you answer a question. You ask a question and then you answer a question. It's similar to the inquiry, but a little bit different. It's a little bit more straightforward, okay? But these are predetermined questions that you ask. And so if you can sort of say, poll your audience or know what questions people are most likely to ask, and then you hit that nail on the head, and it's like 100%, in sync with your audience. If you're answering the questions they're asking, then they're going to be glued to listening to what you have to say. Sometimes people make the mistake of trying to answer questions that nobody's asking in their audience, and that's of course is a problem. You have a disconnect with your audience, and so if you seek to have an audience-centered speech, then you basically do not succeed. So if you know your audience really well, and you know the kinds of questions that they're asking, that is when a question answer is a good one. Okay. Problem solution order is another one that's really good. Usually problem solution is when you're trying to push people to do some kind of changes, like changing their mind for example, you basically say, we have this problem. Here's what the problem is. And then you propose a solution. Sometimes you may propose several solutions, okay? But a problem question is when you establish, hey, we have this issue, we have this problem. And then you say, here's how we can solve it. And that your entire speech is built on a solution. But you first begin with a problem. And everyone needs to perceive that problem. Everyone needs to understand the problem. And make sure that your audience gets it, because sometimes your audience doesn't even realize that there's a problem because they don't even know enough about that issue or question that you're talking about. Again, awareness of something is not a guarantee. So you have to sometimes school your audience just a little bit in order for them to understand that there's a problem. A lot of times people just not aware that there is a problem. You're providing a solution to a problem they don't know exists. So you can imagine how interested that would be. They wouldn't be interested in that at all. But once they see the problem clearly, and once they recognize it and say, oh yeah, this is a real issue, and you offer them a solution, then they're like, then they would be very happy to hear that, because you just solved the problem for them. Human beings do not like to have unsolved things in their minds. So by offering a solution, you're making them feel good. So it's a very good sort of speech, in a sense, psychologically very effective. And of course, your solution better be, practical and possible and workable, because if your solution is, we should just call the aliens to solve it for us or something like that, everybody's going to laugh at you and say, okay, nice. Very, very helpful solution. Whenever the aliens show up, that's when we'll ask them. But if you're offering a real problem and you have a real solution that's practical, something that people can actually do or feel like they can achieve, then you're giving them something to grab onto. They're most likely to be interested. So it has to be a real problem. It has to be a real solution. And in that sense, a problem solution pattern of organizing your speech could be the right one for you. I don't know. So that's certainly works really well in Speeches to Persuade. Okay, another pattern of organizing your speech is called elimination order. Elimination is basically when it's kind of related to the problem solution, where you state several solutions. You may state a problem, and then you may propose several solutions. And then you work through the list of those solutions to see which one is the best. So that's called the elimination order. Well, the first one I propose is good, but it probably won't work, and here's why. This doesn't work, this doesn't work, that doesn't match, this doesn't work. Maybe it'll work, but we have these issues to consider. So what about any other solutions? Well, then I have the second one. Well, the second solution is this, this, and this, and this. But there are also some pros and some cons to this approach too. And so here's why. And then you get to the third one. And of course, the third one is where you really want to have the real solution, right? The one that you think is the best. And you could say, well, the third one deals with this issue, deals with this issue, deals with this issue, doesn't have these same problems. And if we were going to try all three, I'd say the third one is probably going to be the best. And then essentially what's great about this particular pattern of elimination order is you're giving your audience choices. You're giving them options to consider. Sometimes, there's more than one answer to the same problem, to the same question. And different people are going to offer different answers depending on their disposition or level of expertise or depth of understanding of an issue. So they're going to approach it in a different way. Sometimes it's a cultural approach. It really depends. And so you acknowledge their solution possibilities without shooting them down too much. But then you line them up against other solutions and say, all right, you be the judge. Which one is more logical? Which one do you think will work the best? And if you painted the scenario just right, most reasonable people will be able to eliminate the bad answers. Let's put it that way. It's kind of like doing a multiple choice test, right? I mean, you do that all the time. I give you a question and I say, these are the possible answers. And you go through the same logic. You say, okay, well, that one is definitely not. This one, maybe yes, maybe no. This one, I don't know. Doesn't sound right. And you basically eliminate the wrong answers, and then you arrive to the right answer. I say, okay, this one seems to be the right one because I know these other ones most likely are not. I don't feel good about these answers. Sorry. So you say, okay, this is the answer, and you mark it. And so a lot of times, I mean, it's almost like a guessing game, but a lot of times it's just logical elimination of things that are not possible, or things that are improper, or things that don't work. And so it is helpful to give an overview of possible choices to your audience and then help them make the choice, which happens to be the one that you proposed, happens to be the one that you really want to highlight, which is why we call it elimination order, because you eliminate the choices you don't want them to have. And so quite effective again in persuasive speech specifically. Very effective when you have some sort of a call to action, when you have a person trying to when you're trying to motivate people. That's very important. All right, so that's that section. Any questions so far? Any thoughts? What are you guys thinking? Is this helpful? Does this make sense? Any feedback?
I like the way we have different organization types, and I have one question. Do you recommend to use one organization type for a speech, or we can combine them on different sections of the speech?
I would say for a short speech, use only one pattern, because you can blend some of these patterns together, but if you have a very clearly pronounced pattern that's, let's say, dominant one, then that's probably the best, because what it will do will create clarity. And for a short speech, you don't really have the time to develop, a very sophisticated pattern. But, a question, answer, and elimination, you could see how it's easy to combine those, for example. Because you're giving a question, you're creating a problem solution, question, answer, elimination order. All of these are combinable. A lot of people tend to blend those in their logical sort of, say, working out of a problem of some sort.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably have heard this before. I mean, it's common to combine those particular ones, because they work. They're very effective. But, the better, sort of say, the more clear you can be, the more succinct you can be, the easier it is going to be for your audience to accept what you have to say and just kind of follow along. And that's what makes the difference between a good speech and a great speech, really. Because there's always good. Yeah. And then there's always great. And when you hear one and the other, you know the difference. Okay, that was a good speech, but this one, wow, this one was great. So you kind of hear those. All right. Yeah, good question, Francisco. Appreciate it. We certainly can blend these things. Although I would personally recommend, for this class particularly, you don't really have long speeches or anything like that. I would just say stick to the one more so, and that's fine. And so you will have a practice speeches to do. You can utilize these patterns. Okay, all of these are patterns. You're just learning. You're just kind of saying, all right, where do I want to go with my speech? Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. I mean, these are logical ways of organizing speeches. Again, maybe before taking a speech class, you didn't really think much about organizing your speech. But as you look at this material, you're saying, okay, I see how complicated it is to make a speech. There's actually a lot that goes into making a speech. There's a lot of forethought. There's a lot of planning that happens, So like, Nancy and I were talking in the beginning of class. She's like, oh, I'm just, kind of making it up, improv style. But it's learning these little patterns like that where you can realize, wow, you know, I can do pretty good with improv style, but if I use these patterns, well, I can really land that plane. I can land that plane on a dime if I need to, because I can be so clear, so precise, so to the point, so quick to get my audience to accept the idea that I want them to accept, because I structured my speech so well, they have no choice but to be impressed, you know, versus where you kind of trying to find your way as you're wandering through your, you know, collection of thoughts that are in your head that you didn't organize. So things like that. And preparing a pattern and following, sort of say, a plan like this makes it for a very, very effective presentation. Okay. All right. Good. Let's do one more section right here, and then we'll take a little break. Okay. I'm gonna just highlight a couple more pages, then we'll take a break. You know, grab a coffee or something, and then we'll come back and finish out the class. So let's talk a little bit about techniques for creating associative coherence in your speech. Now, when I say associative coherence, does that make any sense to you? What do you think that means? The textbook talks about associative coherence. Anyone? If you were to say those same words in your own way, how would you explain that to me?
Maybe it's related that it's related when we create like when we organize the speech in a way that all of the last point that we talk is related to the next, and it is like a circle.
Yes. This coherence, this is what you're highlighting, is the term coherent. When we say coherent, that means making sense. Okay, making sense. If, then, therefore. If this is true, then this must be true as well, kind of an idea. So that's called coherence. Coherence is agreement, essentially. Okay, the word associative is a little bit different. Associative has to do with what sort of things come to your mind when you hear something. You intuitively associate topics, ideas, thoughts, objects with something else. Okay? If I hold up a knife in my hand, what do you associate it with? All right, let me do a poll. Maureen, if I hold up a knife in my hand, what do you think? What's the first thought that comes in your mind? Maureen, you there? Maureen. All right, Maureen is not with me. All right, Nancy, what do you think? When I hold up a knife in my hand, what do you think?
I don't know, but I think that maybe you will cut, I don't know, a carrot or something.
Cut a carrot. Okay, so you think cooking.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Based on your face and what I know up to now, of course.
Right. So, well, let's say not me, let's say another stranger or whatever. Just anybody, you know.
That it's gonna be.
Hopefully you don't think I'm getting ready to kill you, okay? So that's the idea. But you could think a number of things.
Yeah.
So cooking. All right, I'm going to cut a carrot. Good. If that's the first thing that comes to your mind, that's wonderful. What are some of the other possibilities?
That you're gonna kill me or
kill you,
cut my hair,
or your carrot. Right?
maybe plant a tree or something.
Plant a tree. Okay, good. That's all right. Whatever comes to your mind, that's okay. It's valid. It's good. Francisco, I'm holding my knife in my hand. What does that mean?
I don't know. Maybe you are trying to cut a package or something. Open a box.
Open a box.
See,
that's a good. Yeah, I just got this Amazon box sitting over here, and I need to open it. And a knife is a perfectly good tool to open it with. Yeah, there's a whole lot of things. I can be saying, all right, I'm defending myself. I'm afraid. I feel threatened. So I grab this knife because now nobody's going to bother me. All right. I got a weapon. I'm safe now. Nobody's going to touch me because they're afraid of me now. I'm afraid of them, but if I grab a knife, they're going to be afraid of me. So it could be a whole different list of things that is out there. And this is what we talk about association. Associative thinking is when you try to find a relationship between something that you see or perceive and assign meaning to that. That's what you're trying to do. Okay, knife means war or murder or cooking, whatever it is that's on your mind. That's what it means to you. And, a lot of it has to do with the perception of the audience. So associative coherence means how things correlate to each other. The associations that you're going to make with the items, things, topics, images that I present you, and then how are they going to make sense to you logically? What are you going to tie them to? And how it's going to flow with what I'm saying. Obviously, if I'm explaining to you how to, cook a steak and I'm holding knife in my hand, then obviously you understand that the application of that knife has to do with cooking or something, and you realize that this is a kitchen utensil, But if I'm talking about solving a case of someone's murder and I'm holding a knife, you're like, okay, he's holding an evidence. This must be the murder weapon. And so you associate items and objects and ideas with the context in which they are, used, and you create a coherence. You create a sort of say a system of reference to make sense of it. What it is that I'm trying to do with it. So there are certain techniques, okay, that we use to create this associative coherence in your speech. Basically, you want people to make connections. Quick connections to what you're saying. Connect your topic with your point and do it sort of say in a kind of quick judgment, type of a jump quickly on their way. Okay. So that's essentially, the fancy term associative coherence. That's what we're talking about. So sometimes this book is filled with fancy terms and, sometimes I take it for granted. I'm thinking, okay, everybody knows what it means, but I know that sometimes it's helpful to talk about this and really sort of say translate into other words what it is that we mean by such an idea. So if you run across things like this in the textbook, by the way, feel free to ask me. You're always welcome to say, hey, the authors say such and such on page such and such, what in the world are they trying to say? What do they mean by this phrase? Or what do they mean by that? And so we can always unravel it together. Okay. So it's good to have a understanding. So we're talking about creating coherence, creating a connection, creating a correspondence, an understanding, a sense of, oh, this makes sense. I get it now, sort of say an idea. And so how do you create coherence? Several techniques. First one that they talk about in a textbook is called forecasts. Forecasts. When I say forecasts, what do you guys think about? Maureen, what do you think about forecasts? When I say forecast, how would you explain that word? Maureen? All right, Maureen is not there. I'm going to assume she's not there. I don't know what's going on. But Maureen is not answering. Not cool. All right. So, forecasts. Nancy, go ahead.
Forecast is like when you say that something might happen in future, like prediction, or not.
Okay, like a prediction. Good. Something that's going to happen in the future. So like a weather forecast on TV is doing what? telling you what kind of weather we're going to have today or tomorrow or the next day or the next several days. And so that's kind of that idea. Perfect. Great explanation. Thank you. That's very good. So you can do that same thing in your speech. You can basically tell your audience. Go ahead, Marine. You there?
Yeah, you want me to tell you the meaning of the forecast?
Yeah, I was asking you a question, but I couldn't get through to you.
Sorry.
I was like, where did you go? You got to keep it on point. Sometimes I ask you guys to jump in on a conversation because, frankly, I get bored talking all by myself.
Yeah, I can understand that. Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. But I call on you from time to time, so don't walk away.
Okay. So the forecast means I was actually making food in my kitchen. I just left for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
forecast means to estimate, or like for example, the weather estimation, the prediction. It's called the forecast.
Okay. So can you imagine how we would be able to do that in speech, Marine? Like, what would you do to create a forecast in your speech?
It's just like the brainstorming. If I get the topic from, if I get any topic, so I could do the forecast of it. That is, I could do the estimation of it. That this could be the prediction, or this could be the idea about the topic, and then I could brainstorm my points.
Okay. Yeah, that's in your actual preparation. That could be a good thing to do. But imagine you're speaking in front of an audience. You already got your speech ready, and so what you have to do then, forecast is basically telling your audience what you're going to do. So here's my forecast. I'm going to make a speech, and my speech is about the benefits of clean water. And I'm going to say to my audience, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to explain to you 3 reasons why clean water is essential and why you cannot live without it. And I'm going to say 3 reasons. So what is my forecast? My forecast is today I'm going to explain to you 3 reasons why water is, essential. That's my forecast. Basically, what I did is I told you what I'm going to do. That's my forecast. Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And this is what we mean by a technique. This is how you create clarity and coherence. Now, everyone in my audience is going to be listening from that point on and look for those 3 reasons, right? Yes. They're going to listen, and at some point, I'm going to say, reason number 1, and they're like, oh, okay, he got to reason number 1. And then I'm going to say, reason number 2, and everybody's going to say, oh, yeah, he got to reason number 2. Good, that means his speech is almost over because there's only one more reason coming. You get the point. We're talking about organizational patterns, okay? And so in organizing your speech in this particular way, you're creating a structure and you're creating a certain expectation. And that's important because your audience can track with you. It makes it simple, it makes it easy, it makes you predictable. You're pulling them into a speech essentially by making them follow along. Okay. And it's really cool. It's a technique and it works well. So this is how you create coherence. You create this pattern, that's easy for people to follow. Now, related to that is another technique called summary. A summary, you might be familiar with the word summary from another context, like a summary of a book or a summary of a paper or something like that. A summary of a chapter. Every chapter in this textbook has a summary. But what they mean by summary in your speech is, of course, you recapping the ideas that you have covered. So if I was giving that same speech on the necessity of clean water, and I gave people 3 reasons of why clean water is necessary, I would conclude my speech essentially by a summary. And I will say, now I have shared 3 reasons, why clean water is necessary. And I'm going to actually restate those 3 reasons in a very, very quick, succinct way. Literally, in 1 sentence, I'm going to restate those reasons. I'm not gonna say them the same way I said it in my speech. I'm actually going to paraphrase them. But I'm going to say, okay, I told you about the 3 reasons. And then I'm going to quickly go 1, 2, 3, right? Without numbering them anymore, because they already know they're 3. And then I take you to my conclusion. Therefore, go run out and get yourself a water filter, or please donate to my charity so I can get clean water to children out there because they're growing up without it. So whatever my point is, whatever my action, whatever my call to action, what am I trying to get you to do? Is there a point to my speech? That is going to be following my summary, because my summary is, my forecast is, I told you I'm going to tell you this, then I'm telling you those things, and then in the end, see, I told you those things, and that's my summary. So I summarize it, and then I make my conclusion. So summary is a good way to keep your cohesiveness to the speech, to keep it all together, to keep it logical, to keep it all sort of say organized. There's another technique that I want to talk about, and then we'll take a break. Okay, and the technique is called signposts. Signposts. Now, what in the world is a signpost? What do you think is a signpost in everyday life? Anybody? What's a signpost? Give me an example of a signpost.
For me, signposts could be like where you give reference or of when you are or where you are going to go in your speech.
Okay.
Like first, second, then something like that.
Right. You're driving down the road, and then you see a big red sign, and it's an octagon. What does it usually say?
Stop.
A signpost is
Yeah, go ahead, Marine.
Signpost is a sign giving information. For example, it's about the direction or a distance, like from your nearby town.
Okay. Or what's if you're driving on a highway?
Yeah. So the signpost. So the signpost is like the speed.
Okay.
Speed limit.
It's a direction. It just basically tells you what to do, what to look for, what to expect, or helps you to follow a particular path. So thank you, yeah, Marine. You're right. That's good. That's good. So in speech, signposts are kind of like that. I mean, we're making an analogy between like driving, and when you drive, you see different signs, like you see a stop sign or no parking sign or things like that. That it tells you what to do. Exit here, or the last rest stop in this many miles, or something like that. So you see all sorts of signs when you're driving, and it usually informs you and it tells you what to do. So there are certain transitional words that we use in speech that are signposts. Okay, and the most common one is first, next, third, or finally, or something like that. If I'm making a speech and I say finally, that's it. That's the end. There's no more points after finally. If I say finally and then I make another point, I'm not really thinking it through, right? Because my finally is supposed to be my final point. And then I come up with another one. So I'm not really good as a speechwriter if I do that. So there's several examples here, of signposts. You could see people will say, now look at it from a different angle. If I say something like that, that means I want you to consider the same evidence or the same information, same data from a different perspective. I say, change the perspective. I am giving you a sign that what I want you to do is something different from what you already did. Not to repeat it, but redo it, in a different way. So if I say, Now turning to, that's my transition, right? That's my signpost saying that I am moving to a different part of my speech, okay? So if I use first, next, therefore, all these kinds of words, I am telling you, all right, I'm moving on to a different point, or I'm moving on to a conclusion of my speech. And so you can use those words as very effective signs, as if a person traveling down the road, and all of a sudden you say, all right, exit here now, not in 3 miles, now. You know, and that lets everyone know, okay, this is it. This is what I'm supposed to do. So in speech, you can use certain words to signal to people that this is where you are, or this is where you want them to follow you, essentially. And so if you combine the forecasts with summaries and signposts, you create a very cohesive speech that allows your audience to follow with you, okay? Because you're guiding them through the structure of your speech. Now, if you're really smart, you will use these things in your speech, and you will see how effective they are, because they do work quite well. So anyway, these are techniques to create coherence in your speech. All right, guys, let's take a break. Let's see, it's 4:52, so let's come back at like just after 5, 4:53. So let's come back, you know, let's say 5 minutes after 5. All right, so let's just take a little break, and then we'll wrap up this chapter after that. So walk around, stretch out, get a coffee, get a water, whatever you got to do. Grab a sandwich. I don't know what's on your mind, but don't sit in front of your computer. Just do something. You know, it helps you to stay focused. Actually, if you take a little break, and then you know, don't hang up. Don't just just kind of disconnect for a moment and do what you got to do. And then I'll see you guys in just a few minutes, okay? I'm going to shut off my camera here too.